She was the best engineer on the team. Everyone knew it. And she still didn't get the promotion. That's the part nobody warns you about. You can be the most competent person in the room and still be the easiest one to forget. Picture the meeting. 5 names on a whiteboard, 1 open seat at the table, and a director trying to remember who actually stands out. Her name doesn't come up first. Somebody louder gets said instead, and nobody in that room even notices the gap. Here's what should unsettle you a little. Being good at your job was never the whole test. There's a second, quieter test running underneath it, and almost nobody warns you it exists. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what that test is and how to pass it without turning into the kind of person everyone quietly rolls their eyes at. Because there's a trap sitting right next to this lesson. Some people here get noticed, and they overcorrect. They get loud. They start performing instead of working, chasing credit instead of building it. And that path has a name, too. It just usually ends somewhere far worse than being overlooked ever could. Let's make the problem concrete first. You know that feeling? You finish something that goes well, and you wait for someone to notice. Nobody does. Not because the work was bad, because it went invisible the moment it was finished. Out of sight, out of mind isn't just a saying. Inside most organizations, it's basically the operating system running underneath every promotion decision. Think about how those decisions actually get made. A room full of people who barely know your daily work sits down once or twice a year and tries to recall who deserves the next opportunity. They're not reviewing your file line by line. They're reaching for whatever name surfaces fastest in memory. If nothing comes to mind when your name is said, you don't exist in that conversation, no matter how good the work sitting in your folder actually was. That's the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath everything else in this video. And here's the part that makes it urgent instead of just annoying. That memory-reaching moment doesn't happen constantly. It happens once or twice a year, in a short review window that closes fast and doesn't reopen until the next cycle. Miss it quietly, and you're not just waiting a bad week. You're waiting another year, doing the exact same invisible work for the exact same missed room. So here's the real question worth sitting with. If competence alone isn't enough, what actually separates the people who get remembered from the people who quietly do good work forever? The answer starts with a man who, for a while, seemed to have solved that problem completely, and then lost everything because of exactly how he solved it. In the early 1990s, an executive named Dunlap took over a struggling appliance company and did something almost nobody in corporate America was doing at the time. He made himself the story. Reporters started calling him Chainsaw Al, and instead of pushing the nickname away, he leaned into it, hard. He gave interview after interview promising a brutal, dramatic turnaround. He posed for a national magazine cover with crossed bandoliers across his chest, like a one-man army sent in to save a dying business. It was theater, and everyone knew it was theater. But the stock price didn't seem to care. He didn't stop at the magazine cover either. He wrote a book about his own management style, timed to arrive right in the middle of the turnaround story. And he filled speeches to investors with combative, almost military language about eliminating waste and crushing the competition. Every public appearance reinforced the same character: fearless, ruthless with underperformance, allergic to sentimentality. It was consistent, memorable, and quotable, which is exactly why the financial press kept coming back for more. Here's what's easy to miss about that period. None of this was accidental improvisation. Dunlap had studied, carefully, what actually earns attention in business media, and he built his entire public identity around it on purpose. He understood something most quiet, competent employees never think to ask themselves: that visibility isn't a side effect of good work. It's a decision you make deliberately, the same way you'd choose a strategy or a budget. For a while, that decision worked spectacularly well. He got hired specifically because his reputation preceded him into the room. Boards competed with each other just to bring him in. But here's where it gets interesting. The dramatic turnaround everyone was cheering for wasn't fully real. Investigators later found that the company had been recording sales that hadn't actually happened yet, pulling future revenue forward into the current quarter to make the numbers match the persona everyone had already fallen in love with. The performance had drifted so far ahead of the substance underneath it that eventually there was nothing left holding the two together. You know what strikes me most about this case, even now? It wasn't the boldness that destroyed him. Boldness was never actually the problem. It was that the attention he'd built so carefully had nothing real to stand on once people finally bothered to look underneath it. Think about what that moment must have actually felt like inside the company itself. Employees who'd absorbed months of layoffs and factory closures, all in service of the turnaround story, watched the numbers unravel on the evening news like everyone else. Investors who'd bought in specifically because of the reputation woke up to headlines instead of returns. Nobody inside that building was protected by how convincing the persona had been. The persona wasn't protecting anyone, it was only delaying the moment the truth finally arrived. In 1998, the board fired him. 2 years after that, regulators filed fraud charges connected to the accounting. The man, once celebrated on magazine covers, spent the following years explaining himself in depositions instead of boardrooms. Getting noticed didn't fail him. Getting noticed for something hollow did. And there's a real difference between those two outcomes worth sitting with. Let's pause here for a second, because this is exactly where most people draw the wrong lesson from a story like this. The lesson isn't never stand out. The lesson is that attention without something real behind it is a loan you can't keep repaying forever, and eventually the bill comes due. So does that mean the safer move is just to stay quiet, do the work, and hope someone notices eventually? Actually, no. And the next case, running at almost the exact same time, proves exactly why that instinct is wrong too. Around that same era, another executive was trying to save another dying American company. And on the surface, he made almost the identical decision Dunlap did. Lee Iacocca, running Chrysler through near bankruptcy in the early 1980s, put his own face in front of the public deliberately. He appeared in the company's television commercials himself, speaking directly to the camera instead of hiring an actor. He testified in front of Congress, arguing for the loan guarantees that would decide whether the company survived at all. He became, on purpose, the single visible symbol of whether an entire American industry could be saved. Here's the difference, and it's really the whole point of this video. Iacocca's visibility was backed by something real running underneath it: restructured factories, renegotiated union contracts, and an actual redesigned product line people could go drive and judge for themselves. When people looked past the persona, past the commercials and the congressional hearings, the substance was still standing there waiting for them. The image and the reality lined up. Picture the actual scene in front of Congress for a second. A single executive, sitting alone at a table, arguing under oath that thousands of jobs depended on a loan the government didn't want to approve. That's not a comfortable position to volunteer for. Most executives in that situation hide behind lawyers and spokespeople. He didn't. He put his own name, his own face, and his own credibility directly on the line, in public, where it could be checked against whatever actually happened next. And what happened next is the part that mattered most. The redesigned, smaller, more efficient cars the company bet everything on actually sold. The loan got repaid years ahead of schedule. The visibility Iacocca built wasn't the achievement itself. It was simply the container that made an achievement impossible to ignore once it arrived. That single difference is the reason one man's name became a symbol of American business recovery, and the other man's name became a punchline about corporate fraud. Same instinct, courting attention on purpose. Completely different outcome, because only one of them had something true to back the attention up once people looked closer. Notice what this means for the version of you sitting in your job right now, reading emails, finishing tasks nobody's watching. Getting noticed was never the dangerous part of this whole equation. Getting noticed for something you can't actually deliver. That's the part that eventually collapses on you. Quick thing before we go further. If this is already reframing how you think about being the quiet, reliable one at work, hit like on this video right now. It genuinely helps more people find it. Now let's get specific about what this actually looks like on an ordinary Tuesday morning, at your actual job. Here's the wrong version, the one almost everyone defaults to without ever choosing it consciously. You do excellent work, quietly, and you simply assume the work will speak for itself eventually. You skip the short update email because they'll obviously see the results. You let your manager summarize your project badly in the all hands instead of describing it yourself, in your own words. You wait patiently to be discovered, and in most companies, waiting is functionally indistinguishable from being invisible, no matter how much you privately know you deserve better. Here's the right version instead, the one that actually protects you from ever becoming another cautionary tale like Dunlap's. You make your work visible on purpose, using specific, honest language tied directly to something real you can prove with a number, not a vague update. I cut our processing time by 30%, and here's the exact report showing it. You say the true thing clearly, before someone else gets a chance to summarize it badly, or forget to mention it at all. And here's the part that changes everything. Right in the middle of figuring all this out, the goal was never to become the loudest person sitting in the room. The goal is to become the most accurately remembered one. Loud fades within a week. Accurate sticks for years. Think about your own team for a second, honestly. There's probably someone right now doing genuinely strong work that nobody outside your own department has ever heard about, not once. And there's probably someone else who mentions smaller wins constantly, in specific, credible, provable detail. And somehow, that second person's name keeps coming up first whenever a new opportunity opens. That's not unfair, even though it feels that way some days. That's simply how memory actually works inside organizations built by busy, distracted people. Neither of them is doing anything wrong, by the way. The quiet one isn't lazy, and the vocal one isn't necessarily faking anything. The only difference between them is that one of them decided on purpose to let their real results actually reach the people who needed to know. Attention compounds quietly over time, the same way Iacocca's reputation compounded through years of consistent, provable follow-through. Silence, no matter how talented the person behind it, never compounds at all. Here's a small, honest habit worth stealing directly from this whole comparison. Once a week, write down exactly what you actually finished, in one plain sentence, with a real number attached if you possibly can. Send it to the one specific person whose memory of you actually matters for your next move. Not your whole team, just the one person who decides. Not a brag, dressed up or exaggerated, just the plain truth, delivered on purpose instead of left entirely to chance. Do this consistently, and something shifts, quietly but permanently. You stop being the reliable name people forget to say out loud in meetings that decide things. You start becoming the name that arrives already carrying proof attached to it. That's the entire difference between Dunlap's slow-motion collapse and Iacocca's lasting legacy, shrunk all the way down to your actual desk, your actual week, your actual name sitting in a room you haven't even been invited into yet. I've watched this exact shift play out in real life more than once. Someone finally starts naming their own wins plainly, without apologizing for it or softening it into nothing. And within a few months, people around them start describing them differently. Not louder, just noticeably harder to overlook, the way Iacocca was hard to overlook for the right reasons. What's interesting is how uncomfortable this feels at first for genuinely talented people specifically. The instinct that made you good at the work, heads down, let the results carry the weight, is the exact same instinct quietly working against you here. You're not being asked to abandon that instinct. You're being asked to stop mistaking it for a communication strategy because it was never actually designed to be one. This isn't only about emails either. Picture a status meeting where your manager asks, generally, anything worth flagging this week? The wrong instinct is to say nothing new, same as usual, even when something genuinely went well. The right instinct is 30 honest seconds. What you finished, what changed because of it, said plainly, without over-explaining or apologizing for taking the airtime. That 30 seconds, repeated over months, is exactly the habit that separates the two men in this video's story, just scaled down to the size of your actual week. Let's run this forward as a simple if-then, because abstract advice rarely survives contact with an actual Monday. If you finish a project and say nothing, assuming it'll surface on its own, it usually won't, and someone else's smaller, louder update will fill that silence instead. But if you finish that same project and send one honest, specific sentence to the person who needs to remember it, you've just done what Iacocca did at a scale that fits your actual job. You've made the real thing impossible to overlook, instead of hoping it gets noticed by accident. There's one more layer to this worth naming honestly before we close. Visibility without consistency fades almost as fast as silence does. One good update, sent once, doesn't rewrite how a room remembers you. It's the habit repeated, week after week, quietly proving itself true every single time, that eventually becomes your actual reputation. The version other people carry around in their heads when your name comes up and you're not in the room to defend it. Go back to that engineer from the very beginning of this video for a second. Nothing about her actual skill was ever the issue, and it never had been. If she'd sent one honest sentence a week to the one person deciding her next move, that whiteboard moment probably plays out differently. Not because she'd have become someone else, because the room would have finally had something true to remember her by, instead of nothing at all. So here's the real reason you get overlooked. It was never your talent. It was the silence sitting around your talent, and unlike Dunlap's story, silence is a mistake you can actually undo, starting as early as this week. Before you go, one honest question. What's one piece of work you finished recently that nobody outside your own team actually knows about yet? Put it in the comments below. Saying it out loud, even just once, in public, is the very first version of the habit we just walked through together. And if this channel is helping you see your own career a little differently, subscribe now, because next week we're going into the specific kind of story that makes people trust you enough to hand you real power, not just attention. That one is even more dangerous to get wrong than the lesson sitting in this video.